beekeeping for 40 years, 50 years, you know, and I was excited about getting into, first thing he told me, he said, this is a bad time to get into beekeeping. Okay, you know, kind of, but he remembers when there wasn't varroa mites, you know, so he's been on both sides of that horizon before the varroa mites showed up here and afterwards, and he said it's just like day and dark, just flipping that light switch on or off. That's the difference, you know. So I would tell you as a newbie, and that's the first slide I have in my class on my PowerPoint, is a picture of a varroa mite. And I tell the class, if you don't learn, that's your enemy, if you don't learn what that is and how to combat that, then you're wasting your time taking this beekeeping class, because that's your Achilles heel right there. And you need to learn everything you can about that varroa mite, because that, right now, that's the reason why we can't get 40–50% of our bees through the winter in Iowa. It's not the cold. It's not varroa moths, or wax moths, or hive beetles. You know, they're just like to be a wax moth, and especially the wax moth, is just like a buzzer. He sits up there in the tree and he sees the old deer getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, and pretty soon he comes in and takes over. And that's kind of what a wax moth does. You got a good strong hive, you're not going to worry about wax moth. But anyhow, what I wanted to talk about tonight, how many people in here that has hives don't want any more hives come spring? Number-wise. They need Pat, but they're gonna sell some. But if you're not planning on splitting hives, you gotta figure out, because that's how you get from 2 to 30 pretty quick. You get 3, and you don't want them to swarm, which is kind of ironic, because to me, swarming is really beneficial. But because we're greedy and we want all the honey we can get out of a hive, we don't want them to swarm. Or that queen we bought, we don't want her to leave, you know, and somebody else catch her and get benefits from her. But, you know, if you don't want any more and you want honey production, you don't want any more hives, so you're gonna have to figure out how to keep them from swarming, because again, that's just their natural way. They're gonna split on you if you can't figure out how to keep them from splitting. Now, if you go in there and you take and split them a couple times early on of a good strong hive coming out of the winter, and you split them up, then you're negating the reason that triggers them to swarm to begin with. And the two major triggers of swarming is overcrowding and the backfilling of the brood nest area. I call it the nursery. You got the nursery, you got the pantry. Pantry's up above, the nursery's below. If they plug that nursery up with pollen or nectar, every cell that they put pollen or nectar in is one less cell the queen has to lay in. And it gets to a point where if you're not watching and they plug this up down here and they don't have any more room, it's overcrowding, they're going to start the swarming procedure on you. So they're going to fly out and get in one of my traps, and then I'm going to go out and get them and take them home and give them to somebody. But this I learned from, and I like reading old beekeeping books and stuff when I first got into beekeeping. And this actually came from 2 different beekeepers, but the swarming and the honey production really goes hand in hand. Because again, the more workers you have, the more honey you're going to have. You know, that's just the way it works. The weaker that hive is as far as numbers goes, the less production you're going to have. So the key is how can I keep my hive strong and not swarm? And this method that, like I said, ain't my method, it's just something that I learned. Now, I was just watching a guy the other day talking about checkerboarding. And that's another method, but that's a lot of work. And that works if you've ever read anything on checkerboarding and how you do that. But that can really run into a lot of labor. But this guy's averaging 160 pounds of honey a hive, which he's keeping that hive from swarming, and he's getting a big numbers in that hive as far as workers goes, and he's got big numbers of pounds of honey coming out of each one of them. But that's way too much work that I don't want to do that. You know, it's just, you know, if you only got one hive or two hives, now that's the difference. If you got 1,200 hives like Pat, he's not going to do that because he ain't got the time, and he couldn't find enough people to hire to do that kind of stuff. So if you've only got, and there again, that's what you'll find out in beekeeping. What somebody that's got 1,200 hives is not going to do, you could do because you only got one or two. Okay, so this year, if it keeps going like we're going, these temperatures, I already see people on Facebook talking about tapping maple trees. Sap's already starting to move. We're getting warmer. We can tell by looking at bees landing up here if they've got pollen on their legs or not. So we know when they're bringing in pollen. Can you tell when a bee's bringing in nectar by just looking at it? Very difficult, unless you just happen to see them. They're just so heavy they're just dropping there, trying to get into the front. But you can definitely see them pollen sacs hanging on there. So you know they're bringing in pollen. But what hurts a lot of us, and it did last year, which was a big swarming year, and 2017 was the same way. We had those early, late winter warm-ups and early spring that those maples started blooming, which people don't even know that maple trees bloom. And they not only was bringing in all that pollen, which is triggering the queen to start revving up laying, but they were also bringing in nectar pulling off those maple trees or willows or whatever it might be. So what's happened is those people aren't realizing that they're plugging up this down here, because the only place they've got to put it, because you don't have honey supers on right now, correct? We don't. We've got the nursery down here. Usually most of us run 2 deeps or 3 mediums, whatever your setup is. So they're packing in this pollen, which we can see, and also nectar that we ain't seeing, and we're not really paying attention. And before we know it, before we think about putting honey supers on, they're already packing up and they're already thinking about swarming on us. So that's what we got to be careful of, is that early flying weather during the maple bloom or the willow bloom. Because it might not seem like much, but if you've already, if this top box is it's got 3 or 4 frames of honey still in there or more, they just didn't eat all of it, so all of those frames aren't available to put anything in. Before you know it, they're getting overcrowded and they're filling up the brood area, backfilling it with pollen and nectar, and they're gonna start doing the swarm process. And once they start that, you can scrape those cells off, but generally speaking, the problem is still there. So it would just, and most of the time, you're not gonna find every one of those queen cells. You'll miss one, and that's all it takes, you know, if you go in there and try to scrape them. So what I read on this thing was, this guy did, you know, he had, because most of them, how many in here reverse your boxes in the spring? A lot of us do, and that was kind of a thing to help with swarming, because 9 times out of 10, all of our bees are up here as we get into the late winter. Usually this bottom box is empty, they've worked their way up. Most of the times, they're up here, okay? So this box is empty. So when we call what we call reversing boxes, we take this box, which is empty. This is the one with the queen and the brood in it. We put it down there, and we put the empty over the tops, because they like to work up, correct? So now we've got empty comb above it, which this guy says is good. But his philosophy was, that doesn't force the queen to automatically start laying in this box. So what he does, he forces the queen to be in both boxes. So what he would do, now there again, this is like anything in beekeeping, it's not March 6th at 6 p.m. every year you do this. Every year's different, every spring's different, every hive is different. So, just saying this, it's not a blanket, it covers everything, okay? Because you might have hives that are weak and you might only have one frame of brood and they're really hurting. Now, that's not all bad, because if you got a big one over here, you could pull a couple of frames of brood and bees without the queen, and you could bring them over here to bolster up this one. Not only that, that knocks this one back some, and it increases this one. But if you've got equal pretty much hives, and you know good and well, I gotta do something here if I'm not splitting them, because they're gonna split themselves. So what he would do, if he's got, say, 4 frames of brood in here, and this, there again, this is temperature, time sensitive, you gotta be careful, because you don't wanna split brood when it's 30 degrees, or whatever. But, this is something you probably are gonna have to think about and work on over a period of a couple of years. He would take the center, at least 2 frames of brood out of that box. It used to be on top, now it's on the bottom. He'd take 2 frames out of here. He'd take these 2 frames of brood, put them in the center of this box. He would take, now that he's empty 2 out of here, he'd slide this all together to keep the brood down there all together. He'd slide these over, the 2 empty frames he took out of here, he put out here, on frames number 1, frame number 10. Okay? So now, he's effectively forced the queen and the bees to work in both boxes, instead of just waiting for her, hoping that at some point she's gonna work her way up into this box. Because he said, you can switch these boxes, and it may take her another week or 2 to work up into the top. Okay? But he's automatically forced it. Now he's got bees and brood in both boxes. The queen's gonna be working back and forth in there. Then, that helps with giving them room here to work. Whenever the dandelion, that's usually our favorite flower, the dandelion bloom. And I don't mean when you just see one here or there, but when you see, dandelions really starting to pop, then this other guy would put 2 supers of drawn comb on immediately, right there. Then anything they bring in, they can put it up here in the nursery. In the pantry, instead of putting it down here in the nursery. And I've been doing this now for 8 or 9 years. I cut my swarming down to basically nil by doing this method. And not only then, now you're keeping your queen, you're keeping all your workers. Now they get room to grow without worrying about swarming on you. And you're gonna start getting twice as much honey, or 3 times as much honey, depending. And that's gonna depend on where your location is and what they have to bring in. But this is something I've been doing, and like I say, I've knocked my swarming down to, I might have had 1 last year that swarmed, but it was later. And there again, if you just had a nuke, say you went over to Peggy's and bought a nuke, and you took it on a little 5-frame nuke, if you don't do anything to that, they're gonna swarm. Because you haven't given them any more room. You just left them in that nuke box. I've had these swarm traps that I put out there, they have 6 deep frames in them. I've had them swarm, because I didn't do anything with them. Couldn't give them away or whatever, so I just left them alone. Pretty soon they're building queen cells and they're swarming. Any hive will swarm if those triggers are present for them to swarm, because that's a natural thing for honeybees to do. That's how they, without swarming, they would have been out of existence probably a long time ago if man hadn't started raising queens or whatever else. And just back to what I was saying a little ago, what I think is beneficial on a swarm is, if your hive swarm is 1, you're getting a new queen if things work the way they're supposed to. Two, you're getting a brood break, which helps with mite control. And, you know, it's just one of those things where you know you're gonna sacrifice honey production. And, you know, us being kind of greedy, that's what we want, you know, we want our honey production. Or if you went out here and spent $60 for one of these fancy queens, you know, and you don't want her flying off somewhere with, and losing her. But her genetics is still there, you know. Yeah, Tim?
Just curious about the dandelions and stuff. Do you ever get any, like a super that they fill up from dandelions?
I don't know.
Like you said, you put 2 on there right
I
away.
don't harvest till the 1st of August, that's when I pull
Okay.
everything. Everything goes together.
Yep.
Yeah, that's when I do it. It's too much
Okay.
work. I mean, it wouldn't be if you only had a hive or two, you could cherry pick early on,
Yep.
and you might get some dandelion honey or some early, you know, we all got blooming there early on. Dandelion, you got your red buds, you know, depending on where you're at. You know, you could, and a lot of people do that to get more of a spring flavored type honey to, in relation to just taking it all and kind of,
Yep.
in a sense, kind of mixing it, you know.
Yeah.
Because
that's-
you could have hives 10 miles apart and have 2 different colors and flavors of honey.
Yep.
You know, just depending on what they're working on.
Yeah, and I always wait till August to harvest too.
Yeah.
Some people pull it.
You know, if, like I say, if you only got 1 or 2 hives, you could, if you got supers on there and, cause that's your pantry, you don't have to worry about pulling that early on anyway. And you could, if they get 1 cap, you could go in there and cherry pick and take 1 out and put an empty frame back in.
Yeah.
You know, and that gives you a different type of honey than you would, say, 2 months later when the basswoods are blooming or clover or whatever else is out there blooming.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you knew like if dandelion honey is any good at, you know, or is
It's
there?
not bad, it's a real lighter.
Yeah.
It has a different flavor, but yeah, if you work at it, you can get it, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yep.
And that would probably depend on how much, you know, what I'm doing up here is I'm not expecting them, when I throw those 2 full, well, I use 9 frames in my, cause I got all drawn comb, and I'm using 9 frames in my honey supers. When I put 2 of those on, I'm not expecting them to fill that in a week. I'm just giving them more room, and I'm giving them a place to put anything excess instead of them plugging up down here.
Yep.
And triggering swarming. That's what I'm putting them on there for. I'm not putting them on there because I think they're gonna fill them up, you know, in 2 weeks.
Yep.
I'm just putting them on there to give them more space, to spread them out, and I've got, all my supers are wet. The last 2 or 3 years, I've been putting them away wet. In other words, I haven't put them out after I extracted to let the bees clean them. I'm putting them away wet. And I mean, you put those 2 on there, that's just like giving them a lollipop. You know, they're first thing in the year. And that pulls bees up in there to work on that, get that comb all repaired and get what left honey's up there. I mean, it is amazing. So then in conjunction, this guy that I'm telling you about that talks about the supers, to me, it'd be like if there's 100 of us in this room and we all try to exit at the same time out that door. You're gonna be crowded, isn't it? What if we had 6 doors for people to go out of? And this guy got me hooked on this and I run upper entrances all year. This is what I use. What do they call that? The Shamari, what's that guy's name? Some type of it's just a 3/4 by 3/4 with a little 3/8 cut in it. And I run them year round. But during the honey flow, or when I'm putting on honey supers, he said, first, just imagine that these are honey supers here, okay, instead of brood boxes. So this is my 2 deep brood. He puts on 1 honey super. This is the 2 that I'm talking about, you put on earlier. He puts on 1 honey super drawn comb. He puts an upper entrance shim on. Then he puts the second one on. So this is what it's gonna look like first. And the reason being is, instead of using a queen or a honey excluder, that's what I usually call them. How many use queen excluders in here? You like them?
I do like them.
Okay. I don't like them.
I just like, I just don't want any brood.
They cause more, let me tell you this, they cause more swarming because people don't know how, again, to use them correctly. They cause more swarming than anything.
Yeah,
Because you throw that on there, and they ain't used to going up through it, and if all you got up here to suck them up through there is just bare foundation, I don't know how many people I've called to that says, I can't get them to go up there and work on that super. And, you know, after 2 or 3 weeks, and they can't expand any, what's happening down here? It's plugged up, they've already drawn out queen cells, adios.
Yep.
So, by doing this, by putting one super on first, putting one super on first, and then putting this on, and then another super, I still haven't had hardly any trouble at all with queens coming up.
But that would even be a solution if you used a queen excluder, because then they'd have easy access.
It could, and that's the whole point of what this guy was trying to say, is once you can get them started through the queen excluder, and the only ones I like, and I've got several, that guy gave me, are the wood bound ones with the round wire. I don't like those ones, flat one that's real sharp where they come up through. I know they're cheap, that's what Pat would use, because he's got 1,200 hives, so he ain't gonna pay $10 for a wood bound one when he can get a cheap plastic one for $2, okay? So there again, there's a difference when you're talking commercial people, beekeepers, or big sideline beekeepers to hobby beekeepers, you know. You could afford one if you only got 1 or 2 hives that you're gonna be buying for. But that is the whole point of this guy using these upper entrances, and I've got videos on this. So then, every 2 supers after that, so I got, this is my first super, the one there. I put my queen excluder on. This is my second super. Then there's gonna be 1 more super, upper entrance. Then every 2 supers, upper entrance. 2 supers, upper entrance. Because, let me ask you this, if you've got 4 supers on here, is it gonna be crowded for these bees to go in here, all the bees to go in here,
Well, not
and
only-
either hand it off to another bee, or take it themselves and go 4 stories up here? Or is it easier for them just to go in the entrance up here and dump their loader right back out?
It's the same thing as they used to do, drill holes in the,
You can drill holes. I don't like drilling holes, but you can drill holes. Now, somebody will say, well, you're gonna get a burr comb filled with honey in here. Yeah, I don't care. I scrape that off, make chunk honey with it, eat it, whatever. I don't care. Don't make me any difference.
Doyle, 2 years ago, when he talked about that,
Mhm.
I did it. I made the spacers and I put it on, and, yeah, they built it up, and like you said, when you're extracting honey, I just scrape it off, and it goes into the wax
Yeah,
spinner,
I
and,
just take now a 3-gallon bucket, I take my big wide, my wife does one, just scrapes it off, keeps it in there. I know people that love chunk honey and stuff, I'll just put it in a jar and give it to them, or put it in a plastic bag or whatever. But I've got videos, and I got one that I had eight supers on, no, 7 supers on that hive. And if you looked at that video, there's just as many bees going in every one of those entrances than there was at the bottom. Now, the ones at the bottom basically were taking care of the brood. They were bringing in pollen and the nectar that supplied the 2 nurseries down below. All these other bees were flying in, offloading their nectar up here and then going right back out. And there again, you're spreading out, you're not, there's not 10, 15, 20,000 bees trying to all come through the front entrance, and then they gotta take the elevator up to the 5th floor. Then they gotta turn around, go back all the way back down, and back out the front again. So, you know, I tried it, it's worked, and all I can tell you is it works for me. And, you know, you could drill the holes, and you wouldn't have days in between, which you wouldn't have as much vertical buildup in there, depending on how much space is between that bottom frame and the top frame of whatever your other box is, you know. I mean, it don't take much space in there, and they're gonna put comb in there, and they're up here in the honey supers, they're gonna fill that full of honey. But, I mean, to me, it works, and it's not that labor intensive. It's easier to me than trying to checkerboard. if you look at some of these guys at checkerboard, and checkerboarding works, there's no doubt about it, but it is labor intensive, and you're lifting heavy supers off to checkerboard and then lifting them back on. You know, once I get to probably 4 supers, I don't wanna lift them things, you know, over that. So usually I'll pull them off with the bees, whatever's in there. If the bees are in there, I'll just take them over and set them on a colony that they maybe only got 1 super on it, or 2 supers. I'm giving them more bees and they can protect that honey. That way I'm not up here on a ladder trying to pull 30, 40, whatever, 45-pound super off of there. But, and another thing is, and I've used it for years, I've always used, ever since I've started beekeeping, I've always used screen bottom boards. The first 2 years, they were up off the ground, and I never lost a hive. But after that, I started just putting them like that on. I use pallets. When I was working at a place that had 2-foot by 8-foot pallets, and I could go to Home Depot and buy some 1/2-inch exterior plywood. They could rip that long ways, and that covered 2 of those 2 feet by 8-foot pallets. And then my board sits right here. I say, well, you're not getting, I'm still, and I don't know, did I bring one of those new bottom boards I built? I had, finally, you know how your normal bottom board is your 3/4-inch wood? Well, after about 4 years, mine started rotting, and you get 5 or 6, supers on there, and the thing's starting to squat and curl. So I built all brand new bottom boards, and I use 2x4 construction. So all my bottom boards are 2x4 construction. That keeps them up, 2x4, what's 3.5?
Yeah.
So it's 3.5 inches up to the bottom of my screen. I still get the benefit of all the trash and crap dropping through the screen. And also on my bottom boards, I put a trap door back here. Little piece of sheet aluminum. I drop that off, I can stick my oxalic acid vaporizer right in there. I got a screen bottom board, I can vaporize mine whenever I want to, and I don't have to try to stick it through the front door up here on top and fry any bees that are there.
Why,
So
they
it's
don't
okay.
they don't like that?
Oh, they don't like that.
No, I know they don't.
They don't like it sometimes when you just kind of take a peek and they all start pouring out on you.
Yeah.
But, that's worked great for me. I just put it flat on here like this. If we're gonna have 100-degree weather, which you guys probably never have 100-degree weather up here. But let's just say you're gonna have a stretch of 95, 100-degree weather, you can always put a little shim back here and just prop that up a little bit, and you've got airflow there. And I also use screened inner covers through the summer. And that, to me, gives airflow, which to me is a part of the swarming, overcrowding thing. And then when I take the lid off, they don't come pouring out at me. I can look right down through the screen if they don't focus it all up, and I can see what's going on without even putting a veil on. I can just take my lid off. Here's a screen. I can look in there. If my honey super's on there, oh, they're working on 4, 5 frames. I better get another one ready to put on. So, to me, that has helped too, is the flow, and I guarantee you, and I've noticed it, your honey will dry down, they'll dry that honey down 10 times quicker with that airflow in there too. You got those upper entrances, you got that screen inner cover. I pulled the first part of August or the last week of July. I have no trouble at all with uncapped doing that. So, anybody got any questions? I'll run through things pretty quick. And like I said, this is like anything else in beekeeping. It's not March the 10th at 10 o'clock that you do this every year. It's all going to depend on weather.
When you
Good
make
time.
your inner cover with the screen, you use an 8 mesh on that too?
Yes, just like the bottom.
Okay.
But like now, I started with these years ago, and I just had them I use quilt boxes. Everybody know what a quilt box is?
Yep.
It's basically, it's just insulation. If I was gonna put any insulation on a hive, it'd be the top, because this is where you're gonna get your condensation. is when that warm moist air goes up, hits that upper cover, and then your moisture's gonna drop right back down on your hive. So once it starts getting warm at night, that quilt box will come off, my screen inner cover will go on, and it stays on until the fall, till our nights start getting cool, it comes off, the quilt box goes back on. You know, it's just something I've always done. Is it gonna keep your hives alive? Better keep them healthy.
What do you use for mite treatment?
I've been using ApiGuard, and I've used it now for several years, and I've had real good luck with ApiGuard. And the key is, you know, the key is you gotta make sure it's working, you know, with any treatment. If you, and ApiGuard is like with a lot of the rest of them, if you don't follow the directions, or some of it's time sensitive, some of it's temperature sensitive, and, you know, you can kill every mite in your hive the 1st of October, but if that cluster's already been contaminated, if it's already caught COVID, it ain't gonna make it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, to me, there's just I think there's three things, and one I don't do. They gotta have food. Now, that's something we can control as beekeepers. If they starve to death, that's our fault. Because we can tell if they got enough food or not. So they gotta have food, they gotta be healthy. I like a little ventilation. And also, to be, would be a new queen, or requeening. I don't do that because I catch swarms. And I understand by catching swarms, I may be getting 2-3-year-old queens. I have no idea how old those queens are. And I understand that, so I do lose, in most of the hives, if I do lose a hive, or if I lose it early, it's because it's got queen problems, because I don't have any idea how old those queens are. So ideally, if you could requeen every other year, or let them requeen, make them requeen, you're gonna have a better hive getting through the winter and more success, because everybody knows what a good young queen will do with it, you know, compared to a queen that's 2 or 3 years old. But, anybody got anything else? I know I ran through stuff pretty fast, but there again, it's like I was telling the young men here, you gotta figure out what works for you. And you're in a good place, you got a lot of good beekeepers up here that you can pull from to give you understanding on stuff, or you can call and question or whatever. But that's what you gotta do, and as a year, 2, 3 years goes by, you're gonna know, now, this is working for me, and this is what I'm gonna do. And what I do here, I'm gonna keep doing it until it quits working. As long as it's working, I'm gonna keep doing it. And other people does something different, but if it's working for them, go for it, you know. You know, like I say, if you're a commercial guy and you've got to put mite treatments on 1,200 hives, you know, that's a lot of money, right? So you're trying to sleep at night, trying to figure out how your beekeeping is going to pay the bills. Where me and you, if we're just a hobbyist, yeah, we don't want our hives to die or anything, but we're not laying awake at night worrying, you know, how we're going to pay the bills. It's a hobby for us, and hopefully we're going to have fun doing it. But yes, sir.
So, and what about like feeding in the winter? I know like we've got, and who knows what the weather will do now, but what about like, what temperature would you say you can open up the hive at, and what do you feed with in the winter?
Most of the time I'll just, I have a bunch of sugar on hand that I got cheap. Because a lot of times, like Hy-Vee's got it for 99, I don't know if you'll ever see it again, for 99 cents for a 4-pound bag. But if you'll go talk to the manager or one of the store supervisors, a lot of times they'll let you buy a case of it for 99 cents a bag. You know, if you go talk to them, even though they got a limit of 1.
Yeah.
And so you could stock up on that. I think the mountain camp, if anybody knows what that is, or sugar cakes or something, it's pretty simple, it's easy. 5 seconds you could open that, and I usually have a feeder rim. It could be just as long as you got enough room that you could either slide winter patties, not pollen patties. There again, I see people, because they look at Facebook and they see people on Facebook feeding sugar water, or they see people on Facebook putting in pollen patties. You gotta remember, if you're feeding pollen and stuff to those bees early, you're triggering something. And if you don't understand what you're triggering, again, your bees are gonna be hanging up here in a tree. Because once pollen starts coming in, you're triggering that queen to fire on all cylinders. And then if you start, now, if you're gonna make splits, then you wanna do something, because you want that hive to build up, because you're gonna split it. So there again, you gotta understand why I'm doing it, for what reason I'm doing it. If he's gonna make splits, and he's feeding pollen and sugar water to get them blown up, you don't wanna do that if you don't wanna split, because you're gonna cause them to split, but you're not gonna benefit from it. So, you know, I think sugar is the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, do you wanna explain that mountain camp?
Mountain camp basically is if you got a little feeder ram in the winter, something on top that gives you a little space, and mountain camp to me is you just put a little piece of newspaper down here, take your sugar, get your little spray bottle of water, make sure that spray or whatever it was clean, didn't have anything but, you know, brand new, your water. You just lay your newspaper, I usually squirt the newspaper, kind of get it moist, lay it on top of the frames, right on that top box. Put a layer of sugar, spray it, kind of moisten it, not gonna have to soak it, just moisten it. Then put another layer, moisten it, another layer, moisten it. And bees, by this time of the year, I don't do that early. I usually don't do it till, this year I didn't do it till the first week of January. Because I don't wanna suck them up there too early to the top. And a lot of times, the first year, because I didn't know any better that I did it, I didn't moisten it. They come, and I did it on early, they come up there and drilled a hole through the bottom of that newspaper, you know where that 4 pounds of sugar went? All the way down, right through the screen bottom board, right out the bottom. Went out there and there's like my 4 pounds of sugar sitting on the ground. That's where the moistening comes in, because it kind of makes it cake up, and then, you know, they drill a hole through that paper, which they wear real quick. Then don't do that. But, you know, that to me is just, it does two things. It's insurance, because you should already have. If you're doing that to try to keep them alive, then you didn't do your job back in August and September and the first part of October, when you had weather to feed 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 and get them built up for the winter. If you're putting sugar on them in December because they ain't got any food, then you didn't do your job early on. But what it is, it's an emergency food, it's insurance, and it's cheap insurance. So you're getting emergency food there, and when you get to this time of the year, and they need it, and it's gonna absorb any water that's dripping from above. It's gonna soak that up. So it really is as a double insurance for you. But if you put pollen in there, and pollen is a hive beetle attractor. If you put a big old 1 pound pollen patty on top up there, you peel that up and you're gonna have hive beetles everywhere. My guy I used to talk to one time, he said, I put a bacon strip. So he cuts that 1 pound patty, just a bacon strip size, and puts it on there, and when it's gone, then he puts another one on it. And that doesn't give a place for those dang hive beetles, because they love to eat on that stuff to begin with, and then they get up underneath there, and the bees can't chase them around and get rid of them that way, but, you know, there again, you're gonna, you know, you just gotta figure out what works for you, and what works for you might not work for me, and if we all get to the same place, then, you know, we're all headed for the same direction. We may get there in different ways, but whatever works, that's what we want to do. Did you, how old are you?
17.
Okay, you've probably been too old then for our scholarship program.
We tried it.
Yeah.
I called last fall before to try to get him in.
Yeah.
It was just huge.
The reason we lowered the age on that was because we had a lot of those seniors in high school type people, and then they got their bees in April, and in the first part of August, they were heading off to college. And, you know, so they really never was able to keep their bees a whole year, so that's why my recommendation was to bring it down a year and maybe include 12-year-olds, you know, because they're gonna be around.
Isn't it 14 to 16?
Mine's 13, I
13 to 16?
think, to 16, might have been to 12, I can't remember.
They might have
The
changed.
16-year-old, those people would get the first option.
Yeah.
Then if you still had room, you know, and you had a good 12-year-old that looked good, you know, then you could do that. You'd be good, you got a lot of good people up here that you could talk to, and, I mentors, that's a good thing. If you got somebody that'll mentor you and help you, that makes a big difference. Not do all the work for you.
Did you have a mentor?
Kinda, you know. I learned a lot of things the hard way, you know, and that's, in a lot of the stuff that we do that, you know, that's why I say experience makes a big difference. Cause, you know, if, like I said, those first years, I didn't lose a hive. I think we had 3 the first year, we started with 3, went to 5 the second year, didn't lose a hive. That seemed like that third year, and I think it's because your comb is getting older, your queens are getting older, or whatever, but that third year kicked my butt, you know, that brought me back to reality. Hey, this ain't as easy as I thought it was, you know. And don't get discouraged, because, you know, hives are gonna die, bees are gonna, every living thing's gonna die, and sometimes we don't know why. You know, you just don't know why they die, but it just happens, so you know, pick up the pieces, protect your resources, start over. And that's one thing about having a couple of hives, if this one dies and this one's alive, and it's coming through the winter game busters, you can pull 2 or 3 frames out of their brood and bees, leave the queen here, bring them over here, start you another little hive. You could, for $30, you could probably pick up a queen. Well, before you know it, you've got 2 big hives again. So you got options. So if you only have 1 hive and it dies, you ain't got much options, unless you know somebody nice like Pat that'll give you 2 or 3 frames of brood. Right, Pat? He's wanting to get rid of bees. I just heard him a little ago say he's wanting to get rid of bees this coming year. But yeah, that's you know, it's a fantastic hobby. It just kind of grows on us sometimes as we get bigger. My wife told me one time, if you quit building equipment, then you wouldn't have anything to put them in. You know, they wouldn't get bigger. Because I built all my boxes, bottom boards, you know, everything but the frames. Never did build frames. I figured that was way too wild for that. So I bought my frames and foundation, and then I built everything else, the tops, the covers, the covers, and everything, so. But, you know.
Though you talked about, like, you know, in the fall, honey, putting honey in there. Last year, I hardly had to feed the bees at all. They just packed her full, you know, just barely fed, well, some took a little bit and some didn't take any. You know, they just chucked her full. Year before, I had to feed and feed and feed, but year before, I know I had mite issues year before, so I don't know if that was contributing that they didn't put the honey in, or, you know, so there's lots of different reasons that I figured that, you know, why one year was so much different than the other, you know, so.
Every year's different, every hive is different. You can have 2 hives here, and they're just as different as they can be, just like kids. You can be just the opposite of each other. And their temperament, and their build-up. You wonder, why is this one going gangbusters and this ain't doing diddly squat? You know, that's just, a lot of times it's the queen. You know, she's the egg-laying slave in there. If you don't have a very good queen, well then of course, but another thing is, if she doesn't have enough support, she's not gonna lay 1,500 eggs a day if she don't have a support group there to take care of everything. So, you know, everything's kind of intertwined on that as far as the work part of it. But, yes, sir.
Alright, I'm sorry for asking so many questions, but, you were talking about like you're putting your honey weight, or your honey supers away with some honey on them, and do you freeze yours before?
I run everything through a freezer, yeah.
Do you wanna talk about why with the wax moth?
Just wax moth, and I probably overkill for that, because but I've never had any trouble with, you know, and I store, once I run mine through, once we get 2 or 3, well, you guys get your first freeze here in July? No, I'm kidding.
So let's be October.
Once you start getting that first 1 or 2 good hard freezes, then you can be a little more lax in your stuff. But, you know, there's a reason why they call drawn comb gold to a beekeeper, because it's gold. That honey, those drawn honey super, drawn comb and honey supers, that's gold. You don't want that to get inadvertently ruined. And one thing wax moths, they don't like light, and they don't like air movement. So even if you didn't freeze them, and you could crisscross them and put a fan on them. And I don't mean like out in an open barn, but someplace, you know, the only thing is you don't know if there's any eggs in there to begin with. So that's why I freeze mine. That way I know it's starting out, I don't have to worry about it. And then I've got like a bee barn, I call it a bee barn, that I put out for all my stuff. And I just crisscross them in there, I put a fan on them, and I leave one of the lights on, you know. Wax moths like dark, that's how they put traps out to catch these things, and then the dark they whoop in there. If you keep light and air movement, 9 times out of 10 you won't have trouble with wax moths.
And once you get a couple freezes, you can basically.
Yeah, once you get a couple freezes, then you're good. But I mean, if you freeze them first, like anybody that's got 1 or 2 hives, they don't, even if you just had to freeze 1 frame at a time, you know. And then you could put them anywhere in your house or your basement, as long as you know that there's, with the weather, the wax moth can't get to them. Now, if you take them out here in a shed or something outside, in the dark out there, then it's possible you could get contamination with wax moths before we get a hard freeze that takes care of them. But yeah, I picked up 3 freezers, upright freezers. And I think I got 2 of them for free, I think, one for $25, old things, but they still run. The old appliances still run. The new stuff you buy don't last a year or 2. But I can take a whole super, I can put 4 supers in that little 14-foot cubic foot upright. So I just leave the frames right in there, I just slide them in there, and then I just rotate to pull them out. I'll throw, you know, I can do 12 at a time, because I got 3 freezers. Slide them in there, and then they're all done. I used to scrape all the tops off, and I used to scrape all the, you know, it makes it easier, because, you know, once they profilus up that leg, you can hardly slide them dang frames in it. But there again, I'm only running 9 frames in there. And so I've been putting them away wet. And like I say, that's just like giving them a lollipop there in April. Usually somewhere, I usually try to do this part here, that first part, in the latter part of March. You know, like again, our springs are variable, but it looks like this year may be another one of those early ones. So I'm gonna start thinking about that part there, because they're coming out of winter and they're already building up. Queens are probably laying right now to some degree, not a lot. And boy, once that pollen starts pouring in there, that queen is just gonna kick in all cylinders. And I mean, they can really get away from you fast if you're not watching. And that's the whole thing, is you gotta know what's going in there. People say, well, you know, they see somebody on Facebook, or do I need to feed my bees? Well, you feed them when they need to be fed. How are you gonna know if they need to be fed? You gotta know what's going on in here. You don't have to, I know a person that used, she took our classes, it was in our, but when she did her hive inspection, she took out every frame of every box. I said, you don't have to do that. I said, when you go out to do a hive inspection, what are you looking for? You need a reason to do your hive inspection. Once you see, and that reason is fulfilled, then you don't need to go any further. You don't need to pull out all 20 frames out of your brood area. You don't need to see the queen if you can see evidence of eggs, larvae, and brood, or cat brood. You know, if you see her, fine, then maybe you won't see her. But what is your reasoning to go? But she was doing it like 2 or 3 times a week. I said, you're setting back, you know, smoking, and I said, you're setting that hive back every time you go in there. You know, but if you don't have to, it's good to know. And when you're first starting, it's good. That's how you're going to learn, because you're going to get in there. You're going to see eggs. You're going to see larvae, different stage. You're going to see your cat brood. You're going to see drones. You're going to understand what drone brood looks like. You know, you're going to see drones. You're going to understand what they are. You know, so yeah, when you're very first starting out, you might be in your hive a little more and looking a little more, but you know, once you know, if you're reasoning just to make sure you got queen or whatever and the brood pattern, once you got that figured out, then I don't go in there. Once I put my honey supers on, because I know when I put my honey supers on, kind of what that hive is doing, because I've already looked. Once I start putting that honey supers on, I never look in there again till I pull the honey supers off. Unless I go out there and I take and I can tell there's not as many bees as there usually is. I can usually tell in that top box, whatever it is, if that population is like it was a week or more ago, or I don't see this down here looking normal a week or so ago, then maybe I need to do a little further investigation. But after that, I don't take that very serious. She was pulling her honey super saw and doing a full hive inspection all the way down to the bottom. I mean, I said, man, you're just doing too much work. Now she don't do any bees because her back's, which is probably because of all of that, you know. But, you know, there again, that's just my opinion. That's just what I do on it. But what kind of an average you guys get up here for, you know, a good average pound per hive?
I think most of them will get 70 to 110.
Well, that's a good average. What mainly you get clover? Sweet clover?
I think we get a lot of the lindens, a little bit of clover, soybeans.
Soybeans, I think people are getting more than what you realize.
About 30% of your honey is usually soybean.
We had a couple of people in our club, and it cost, I think, it's like $200 or $300. They sent comb and honey off. Forget where they sent it now. And they got a report back of all the different traces of chemicals in the comb, that's your sponge, that's what's absorbent. And then their honey, they got report back of the pollen sources, and how somehow they can determine a certain percentage of that honey came by the pollen in there. It came from here. And a lot of it was a surprise of that particular year anyway. It was like 15 to 20% was soybean.
Yep.
On the ones of those people that sent it in. Now, those of us that may be in town, and you know, your soybean, maybe the closest soybean field is 5 miles away, probably ain't gonna have it.
Yep.
You know, because I can see a big difference in my rural to my urban hives. Urban hives, I get a lot of basswood and linden because there's just a ton of it there in town. If it's a good year for that, and you know, they can just load up on that to where my rural hives are got more clover or soybean or something like that to them, because there's not as much out that way. But anybody else got any comments or?
So did you get your pattern for your making your stuff off the internet then, or did you have somebody
Pretty
give you the
much.
plans?
I kind of followed the old fat B-man on my boxes, because I can cut everything on my table saw. I don't have to use a router or nothing, and it's a really slick, you cuts the ledge and everything out perfect on that, and to me, that worked great, because I can just adjust and I even got a jig to cut these handles with. I finally got away from that, because those cleats, even though they're not pretty, it's sure easier to lift them with than a heavy super by these little handles here. But I do have a jig that I can cut with my skill saw. I can cut within 30 seconds, and they look just like that, you know. But I did get on, I used his, and everybody's kind of is a little different. Even some of the, like Dedant to Man Lake to Better Bee or somebody, they can be a little different on the ledge depth and stuff, or the top of your wooden bars of your frames can be different, thicker or narrower or whatever. So, but that's what I did with, I just got a deal from him. You can get the plans. I think he charges for it. I think he's even still on YouTube. I haven't looked in a long time. Yeah, and just cut my own. And you can do it, like I say, with a table saw. So you cut your sides and ends, and then you just take those and you run those through your table saw to cut that edge. And they're a rabbit joint is what it is, which is kind of what this is. I did get a jig, had a guy build me a jig for the dovetail, which really looks pretty, but actually, especially on your brood boxes, you got a lot more exposed wood that way, those finger joints.
Sure.
So you can get rot in there a lot easier. And if you don't get it just perfect, it's not gonna be smooth on top or down here, you know? But that rabbit joint thing that I built with his, I've had those for 9 years or something. Never had one come apart or anything yet. And I built my honey supers and my deeps both that way. Just use Type Bond 3 glue. It's a good exterior Type Bond 3 glue. And the old saying in carpentry, and I'm not a carpenter, but the old saying in carpentry is the nail only holds it till the glue dries,
Right.
you know? And then I just use 1-inch staples, 1-inch double crown staples in there. And then that thing is just solid as a rock. I've dropped honeysuckle before and it never even got out of the square, you know, so, you know. To me, that's the easiest, and it'd be just kinda like this, it's just a rabbet joint.
Right.
And then all you got is really for that exposed piece of wood, is that's that little sliver right there. Just paint them up good and last longer than me on it. Everybody excited about spring and bees? They were flying good, the day, once I went and looked at it. Supposed to get some good weather, you guys supposed to get a little warmer weather this coming
Yeah,
week?
got
Look
almost
like
a-
next
got
week will
almost
look
a
bad
40
either.
this week.
Yeah. Get a little sunshine, that sunshine means all the world of them bees. You can have a 45-degree day and a cloudy, and you won't see a bee. I've been out there in the mid-upper 30s on a calmer wind, no wind and sun shining. They're just flying like crazy. So, good. Anybody gonna bring any products to the fair this year? You're gonna be bidding on stuff, right? You gotta get rid of stuff. You got extra honey?
We will by then.
Candles? Candles? Maybe.
Not gonna quit yet.
Yeah, I guess so. Bring some stuff down. Madison, you brought, Madison brought some stuff down last year.
I know it's,
More than, no,
yeah, it's a lot harder on the exhibiting for the judging thing, you know, when you live a long ways off and you just got somebody coming, that's a long drive just to bring something, but, you know, we'd love to see more entries there if we can get them. We expanded the youth, I was after Andy for several years, he finally got their fair to approve those new youth classes. So we've got that expanded last year, we had a lot of good youth, entries in there, last year, so. Now they can show candles that they couldn't used to, now they can show, frames, either capped or uncapped frames that they wasn't able to do before, so. That got a lot of kids that get into beekeeping through 4-H and FFA too, so that's a good thing for it. I don't know, I've already told you more than I know, so I don't know what else I can say. Good luck and stay healthy, I guess that's what I can say. Been through a lot of crap here the last couple of years. Maybe we're gonna get better. Keep thinking that, hoping. Thanks a lot for letting me come up.
thanks, Doyle. Anybody else got anything they wanna bring up real quick here before we get
Yeah, do they
done?
have a mead class at the fair?
You know,
Oh,
somebody just brought that up at our committee meetings last weekend. And I'm gonna bring it up to Andy and see if, now we could even sell meat over there, but we'd have to get a liquor license to do that. But as far as entries into somebody just brought that up, and, you know, I don't know what the fair would say about that.
There is a mead section of the fair, it's a different part, but there is a mead, wine, they have wine.
Yeah,
And then they also have mead.
yeah, but I was thinking about maybe doing it up there in the apiary section is having a thing. Cause there's a lot of people getting into that anymore, I mean, doing a lot of that, so that would definitely be. I'm gonna bring it up to Andy and see what he thinks, and the fair would have to approve it.
If anybody's got a good mead recipe, I'd be interested in doing it.
Well, there's a lot of people out there doing it. I mean, if anybody that was down at the fall conference, I don't think there was a bottle of that mead that went at the Queen auction for under $100 a
Oh, it
bottle.
was unbelievable, some of that.
That one guy must have bought
He was
a
from-
dozen
he-
bottles.
He was from Wisconsin, but he brought mead to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he brought mead over and bought,
Was it
took
Andy?
stuff back, no,
Kenny Hupkin,
I
yeah.
think it was, yeah.
Well, Andy was one, and then there was another guy, he may be hooked up with Andy.
He's the guy that's from, I think South
The younger
Dakota.
guy,
A younger guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit stocky,
Yeah,
yep, that was him.
and they both make some really good mead.
Oh, his bottles went really good.
Well,
Anybody
I
do
mean,
it?
all of them, there were some more there, and they all so good, you
Yeah,
know, so.
there was a lot of bottles of mead that got sold.
Did you drink it?
We tested, yeah, we had.
Was it sweet or dry?
There was a lot of different ones, that some that were a little more drier than the other ones, I mean, it just,
I have to bottle some, and I've been wondering whether to sweeten it back or not.
yeah, I guess, you know, depending on what you're using for your flavor, or, I guess that's what you'd call it, flavor, yeah.
I
you
just
know,
flavored it back with honey.
Yeah. If you just wanted honey, just honey, I guess. You don't have to flavor it, right?
Yep, no.
So, all right, we're gonna do our raffle prizes and drawings here now.
We'll do raffle prize first.
Ken, yep,
Okay, you do these. Is it Alan? Osborne?
Was that the one with magic marker?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you gave me that, and I said, I can't write.
I set you up. Alright, so you want the pink hive tool?